I really thought that the equivalent work of having a Kundalini awakening, rising up through from the base of the spine had already been done. It came on really initially like a sense of lower back pain. I just kept feeling this really intense sensation on my lower back. And one day I really laid down and I was like, what is this? And the base of my spine exploded. It was just like a hot coal erupted. And then from there, it was on its own. I had zero real control over it.
Guy here. My epic guest today is Patrick Paul Gallinger. And you might even notice behind me that the image has changed from Surfer Tom Blake to this stunning piece of artwork. And if you're curious what that is, and of course, if you're listening on iTunes and Spotify, jump on over to YouTube for a moment to check it out. That is actually my personal frequency. And the guys at Science of Sound I've teamed up with. And what it allows you to do, they can use biotuning to get your personal frequency, and then they use sound, light, and vibration and capture the photography. I love it. I think it makes stunning artwork, amazing for your office and home. There's a link below. Check it out. If that interests you and if you resonate, find out more from the guys over there. Beautiful. And the podcast today with Patrick. What I loved about Patrick is he's got a background of, he's an academic, and he had a full spiritual awakening or a Kundalini awakening, depending on what terminology you use. And it's something I've experienced personally and resonated a lot with that. And I love finding people and having conversations that then unearth what's possible and the possibilities of what a spiritual awakening is, what it means, and how we can integrate that in our lives. Patrick's a great guy. It was a great conversation. Enjoy. Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Guy.
I find it's always the same where we get talking offline and there's so much coming out already. It's like, got to hit record button. I think I'm fascinated to see where this conversation goes today. After stumbling across your YouTube and hearing your own journey, which sounds like it's been quite a journey for you. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes.
First question I ask everyone. Let's say you're out in the street, you're in New York, and a complete stranger comes up to you and asks you what you did for a living right now. What would you say?
Yeah. Well, that's such a great question, because that happens not necessarily on the street, but, in New York, I run into people, I meet people, and I often use my own intuition in that moment to sort of figure out what's the best way to frame this. So sometimes I say I'm, a spiritual writer. Sometimes I'll say I'm an intuitive guide. Sometimes I say I'm a mindfulness teacher. Sort of,
okay.
Wherever I'm at, most of the time I just say I'm a spiritual writer and I'm an intuitive guide. And then that prompts a question. What does that mean? Yeah, what does that mean? And it's usually the latter part, the intuitive guide part, sort of getting into readings and things like that, where people start to have lots of questions.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, because the spiritual writer pricked my interest then. And I was like, I'd be like, well, what do you write about, in that context as well?
Yeah. And a lot of people start there because, it's often something I lead with. I very much identify as a writer, have a deep relationship with the written word. And, I say I write about meditation, mindfulness, but about sort of, consciousness and the nature of reality and sort of keep it high level. And then, as the conversation flows, I'm trying to meet them where they're at and sort of, not overwhelm them by sort of saying, well, my first 3 books were channeled, and then this, and people are like, what are you talking about? So
totally. Would you have an academic background? Is that, am I right in saying that?
I do.
Right. So it's quite a contrast, because, even that people come to our retreat, sometimes we are very analytical thinking, this it's gotta be like this linear understanding approach to something.
Right.
And if it's outside that, they freak out. Like, was that you?
Yeah, you know what's so fascinating is, yeah, I had a very strong intellectual mind, without a doubt. I have a PhD in Spanish, so I was really focused on literature and language,
Okay.
and then a JD. So I'm a lawyer. I'm trained as a lawyer, so it's
Oh wow.
very analytical. Like I can really, and I could go into those modes, and there's a benefit to them. But yeah, I was really resistant to anything spiritual, um, and I found myself basically I had the capacity to edit out material I didn't read. I would read books on yoga that started talking about, spirituality in ways that I couldn't get, and I just skipped right over it. I just could not, and I said, psychics are all people making it up, so it really took the universe, like basically banging me over the head to let go of my
Okay.
yeah.
I think that's a time to get into it then, because I'm fascinated. How could that guy end
Yeah.
up channeling 3 books? Like
Yeah.
there's clearly a bridge
There
there.
is, and what the beautiful part of the bridge, just to answer that part, is that I find that I can really speak to those people who show up with the really analytical mind, who are like, break it down for me. How do I could repackage things that are not linear in ways that make sense to lawyers. So I get
Hmm.
people who are lawyers and business people and who come to me, but basically it took a dark night of the soul. The universe really hit me upside the head. I was definitely going down a path of going into law and academia. Again, I had left Spanish to go into law. I was headed off to Harvard Law School on a fellowship, and I literally had a breakdown. The
Wow.
universe was like hitting me over the head. I could not accept this fellowship. I woke up every morning like ready to throw up. I was like nauseated, and I
You
was
just
like,
didn't
what
want to
is
do it, or
I didn't want to do it. Like every fiber of my being was like, do not take this fellowship. And it made no sense to me whatsoever. This is one of those first moments of really hearing an intuition that was like, this is not for you. And I wrestled with it, and I had a breakdown, and because I burnt bridges. All of my mentors were like, what are you doing? And it was only then that, basically all of these people began showing up in my life: psychics, healers, divine mother figures. Met an acupuncturist who was like, go see this person. And finally I met really the first psychic who ever read me, where I was like, oh wow, I have no idea what I'm talking about. All of my previous sort of dismissal. And he was like, wow, yeah, the universe cracked you right open, because you were really a tough egg to crack. And that's
wow.
what did it. I had to
Do
go
you
through a lot.
do you feel you had to go through that on your personal level because you were
Mm,
so kind of in your head?
yeah,
If it's a broad
it's
statement, I know.
no, it's a great question. I have at times asked, because people are waking up more and more. I mean, it's amazing to me
Mm.
the way in which humanity's awakening is accelerating. And so there are moments I've said, "Gosh, why couldn't have this just been easier?" And I'm always reminded, I'm always told, like, you could not have done it any other way. There is no point in looking back, because for example, one of the turning points for me is that I was very close to not going to law school. I was actually really close to going and becoming a yoga instructor, which is really very far off. And but a I was in a relationship at the time, and a sort of an environment where that was really just, why would you do that? And so I sort of turned it off, and I went down the law path, and the universe basically rerouted me. Um, but I don't regret it, insofar as I have that capacity to now speak to a certain audience and to certain
Mm.
people, and I understand that mindset.
Yeah,
It gives me a
got you.
window into a certain world.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I feel the same way in many respects from my background.
Hmm.
which is very different to yours.
Right.
Mine was rugby in the valleys of Wales. You know, it was just like,
No.
yeah. So once you saw the psychic and you said, "Oh, you're a tough nut to crack," and here
Yeah.
you go, kind of thing. Then what happened? Like, how did you start to develop your skills and lead it in? Because I know it all led to a Kundalini awakening, which I'm sure we'll get into soon. But
Yeah, it did. At that point, I was really starting to sort of open up to different teachers, healers.
mm-hmm.
I went through a really protracted healing period after sort of this breakdown where I was really unwell, and I got better, and I was sort of back to. I became a lawyer. I was practicing law, which I enjoyed in many respects, in ways that I hadn't anticipated. And so along the way, I was sort of working with different people and worked with some people who really began to kind of help accelerate the growth, doing a lot of energy healing, working with different intuitives to sort of unravel different pieces. And then it was in the course of that, over the course of like 3, 4, 5 years, it was about 5 years later that the Kundalini awakening happened. And that was the sort of experience that had no expectation, no anticipation. I had no idea that was what was in store for me.
Okay. Did your colleagues know you were doing this at the time?
That's a wonderful question. So I never hid that I had a spiritual life. All right. People knew that I meditated. Certain people were more open to it and others, and this is not uncommon in the legal profession, that it's increasingly more common that mindfulness is embraced with an understanding that it helps you to be a better lawyer, more calm, less stressed. It's not tied to sort of cosmic sense of, a different kind of consciousness. But no, and that's ultimately part of what led me to decide to leave the law. Part of it was just recognizing that there was all of this work and that, balancing the two was something that was very hard. I have a very deep sense of, a sort of ethical sense of, being able to do the job properly. And I always did, but I knew that the Kundalini wanted to go somewhere, the books wanted to go somewhere, and there really isn't space for both. So I had to kind of step away.
Which I'm keen to get into that in a moment as well.
Yeah.
But so bringing up the Kundalini, then there's a few questions, if that's okay, instead of just keeping
Absolutely.
it one. But one is, were you aware of Kundalini when it happened? Did you have any mentors with you? And what is Kundalini? So there's three there. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's the second question again? Just did I have?
Did you have a mentor, so people that you could confide in that were supporting you through it?
That's right. So I did. I had a mentor, and we had been doing a lot of energy healing, a lot of clearing, and a lot of training, and that's partly why I didn't expect a Kundalini awakening. I sort of thought that the energy work that I've been doing was ultimately kind of, a different path to the same outcome. And, Kundalini for me was very intense, as it is for many people. And so I was prepared for it. I knew about it. As soon as I knew the concepts, I'd certainly worked with the chakras, had felt energy moving through chakras. But I really thought that like the equivalent work of having a Kundalini awakening, rising up through from the base of the spine had already been done. Like that had happened through the course of the work that I had done. So I was surprised, and it came on really initially like a sense of lower back pain. I just kept feeling this like really intense sensation on my lower back, and I was stretching, and I was trying. And one day I really laid down, and I was like, "What is this?" And the base of my spine exploded. It was just like a hot coal erupted. And then from there, it was on its own. I had zero real control over it.
Wow.
Yeah.
How would you describe then what a Kundalini is for people, just for the layman listening, going, and what happened then because I would struggle to surrender into that at first. Like I'd
Yeah.
close my eyes and all I could see is energy. I could feel energy coming out of my hands. And it's just like, what is going on?
What is going on? I know. So, and one of the things I love by hearing this is, everybody you could say Kundalini awakening, and it's, everybody's experience of it is slightly different. It's because of how you're wired, how I'm wired. For me, it was classic, like at the base of the spine. It just felt like literally like a fire. Like if I could see it, it was like lava erupting at the very base of my spine, and then it would move up. It was moving up the column, the Sushumna, and it would stop at each of the chakras, and it would sort of like push and buzz, and then there'd be like a breakthrough. And sometimes I was sweating, and sometimes I was like electric, and I could feel, my stomach rise or my chest rise, and it would just go back and forth. And to this day, I mean, it's a much, much smoother. It's like very smooth now. But initially it was like a demolition, just punching through walls of karma.
Yeah, it's like blowing crud out of the hose pipe, isn't it?
That's exactly.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And then over time, it got smoother because it could, gently expand, and there wasn't as much crud to blow out.
So how would you describe what it is then, and also what its purpose is? Like why are you having that experience? Like what are the benefits and so forth?
Yeah, so for me, Kundalini is sort of and it's classically described as this sort of dormant spiritual energy that's at the base of the spine. And in a way it's interesting because that it wakes up there as if it's in the body already. Right? As if we already have it. And yet we also have crown chakras, opening to sort of cosmic energy. And I felt energy come in from both directions. But it's as if it's the body's own sort of, sort of knowledge of its inherent connection to source that just wakes up. And for me, it has always been about sort of clearing out and expanding, sort of past lives, old karma, thoughts and beliefs, everything that's sort of contained in those energy centers that we call chakras, and continually kind of expanding my perception and my consciousness in terms of sort of how I experience reality, which is not the same as yours and not the same as anybody's, but my own kind of relationship to the cosmos.
Wow. Yeah. And when did this happen for you?
Mine was in 2016. So,
okay.
Yeah.
It's been a while as well.
It's been a while. What about you?
Yeah. 2015.
2015. Yeah.
So,
good years for Kundalini.
Yeah. So at that point when it happened, talk to me a little bit about the integration then, because clearly, was it over days, weeks, months? It sometimes feels like years.
It's years. So the first real intense part was the first 2 months, where like for 45 minutes a day, like often twice a day, just, based on my schedule. And this was the funny thing, is there was a real intelligence to it. Like I didn't have control, but it didn't interfere with my like work life or anything like this. And it also happened at a time though, when I was actually, I was like on a sabbatical. Like it all worked out just so seamlessly with like the rest of my life. I wasn't like on trial or something and like, this is going to, really disrupt. But for 45 minutes a day, I was, just knocked out, no control. I just had to let the energy run its course. And for me, what happened is that intensity really lasted for 2 months, but it has never gone away, in the sense that at different periods of my life, it sometimes will go away for like a stretch of time, but on any given day, like my crown chakra can open up, and I call it Kundalini, but it's just sort of really feeling connected to the cosmos. And energy comes in, and I sort of get very blissed out, and can't really have conversations with people. But that has stretched on and on. The initial 2-month intense period where that it sort of settled and sort of let me get back to a certain kind of life. But that it was in the middle of it that I started channeling. It was a month in that I heard this voice. I felt these like drops of light. Like I just felt this energy in my head, and I heard these words that it was like, we're going to write, and we're going to write quickly. And then 3 books came through in the period of the next 6 months. Again, I didn't have any control over it.
I can relate to this. It sounds like, if you're not aware of any of this kind of thing, at the first time you hear it, you're like, what? But it to me,
exactly,
it's perfectly normal what you're sharing.
Well, and you said something important, which was, what is its purpose? And, I think that's one of the things about one, it's incredibly enlivening. It's ultimately very healing. It's very clearing. It's very expansive. I've had my heart expand, my throat chakra cleared, these sorts of things. It brings incredible growth, but ultimately it's like, it's carrying you, it's taking you on a journey, to that, you and your soul know. For me, it's sort of teaching me, how little I know. It's teaching me about my soul. It's teaching me to surrender. It's taking me on a journey where I'm along for the ride, and I'm doing my best, but ultimately I'm not in charge.
It's buckle up, isn't it? It is interesting because I'm always conscious about speaking about certain experiences and this topic, because I find, or I'm wary of, people listening to this might want to chase the experience,
yes,
and then bypass the very things that they need to be dealing with that will actually allow them into the experience if they met themselves.
That is such an important point. It's a great insight, and I want to emphasize it because I've had a lot of people come to me like, how do I awaken my Kundalini? And I don't teach any course. I don't purport in any way to help somebody open their Kundalini, because to me it was an act of grace. And as you say, I don't want to chase things. Anything I've ever chased, I've never gotten. Like this is not what I asked for. I chase things, and it's like, why am I chasing it? You talk to people who've had near-death experiences, beautiful, incredible experiences, where they're coming back and they're like, I have a whole new perspective on the nature of reality and why we're here. I've never had a near-death experience. I've been around death. I can talk about death, but I haven't had that experience. And so to me, part of the beauty is that we don't all have the same experiences. And a little bit, it's like, just let the divine, let spirit take you on the journey that you're meant to have, whether that's a Kundalini experience, an NDE, some other mystical experience.
Yeah.
And let that be your guide.
And then surrendering into that. Were you still in the law firm when this was going on, or had you left by then?
So admittedly, as time goes on, my memory of like events gets a little fuzzier. So I was at the firm. I was not at the firm. I was brought back on a very part-time basis. And then the firm asked me to come on full-time to help with something. And I did. I actually went back and practiced law and did a trial and all that. And like everything worked out. Like I wasn't having any sorts of like experiences that like prevented me. But there was a sense of like, my time here is really limited, like running out. And my capacity to sort of do that and not have a public role doing this kind of work, I didn't feel like I could do both. And so, there came a time in 2018 where the message was very loud and clear. Like, it is time to go. And that's when I said goodbye.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you feel, and I want to touch on this topic because I feel many people that I interact with on a weekly basis, there's a transition happening of some kind. There's been a life event or something, or lack of purpose, not satisfied in their career anymore,
Right.
past traumas they haven't dealt with, maybe successful but unfulfilled. Like there's a lot of buckets, I guess, of you could put people in of why they can't relate. But we're all and so with you, when you were transitioning out of law, then was it an easy decision? Did you come out of the closet per se in terms of the work you were doing, or did you just carry on like normal and just put it out there? And
yeah. It was pretty seamless in that it was very quick, my transition out. Like I sort of announced it. And it was like I stayed for a few months to sort of wrap up some things. And then when I was leaving, I didn't share the full story with people of what was going on. I just said I'm moving on to teach mindfulness and spirituality and continue writing and doing things. And what's interesting is that for me, there's really a very deep karmic connection with like the law and authority and all of that. I've got a lot of past life stuff. I've been a lawyer in the past. I've also been a teacher in the past. And so there's a sort of, for me, a kind of is it centrifugal? I'm forgetting my word, centrifugal. It sort of pulls at me. The law like keeps coming back to me in different ways. And so I've had different projects here and there. And part of that for me, that journey is, being very open about who I am now. And like, if you still want me involved in some way, knowing that this is who you're getting. Like, I'm not lawyer Patrick and I don't practice law anymore, but various sort of projects have come up that have been sort of law adjacent, so to speak. And I'm like, I've learned to just be like, but this is who I am now. I have this pedigree, but here's everything else that I'm doing. And that's been my slow evolution away from, a very strong identity that that extends well beyond this lifetime.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when people come and see you now, what do you generally, I'm sure every person's different, but what do you generally do with them? What tend to things happen? How you work with people?
Yeah. So I work with people in I would say three primary ways. The first is reading them. When I started channeling, like the work that came through, was like for a lot of channels, sort of about the nature of reality, about the nature of consciousness, and what it means to be human in ways that I had never thought about. A lot of my work is about time. And so when I would start working with people, I'd start to get a real sense, like years ago, I would start to get real sense of sort of like their emotional stuff, what they're bringing. And over time, those faculties have just grown as I've, committed to that work. And now I do readings where, it's a combination of clairvoyance and clairaudience and clairsentience and claircognizance of, whatever's coming through, of sort of reading, what are people bringing? What are their patterns? Most of us have lots of deep emotional patterns still that we're carrying even now, even with the Kundalini. I can talk about my patterns. I know what they are. And, people come with a feeling of being stuck, and it's very hard to see ourselves sometimes. We can't see through the lenses that we're using. It's like, the glasses that you're wearing, you're like, this is who I am. This is how I'm seeing myself. You're like, how do I take them off? And sometimes we need somebody else to just share. This is how I see what's going on with you. And then bringing with that some wisdom, some of the material that I've learned. I also, sometimes work with people more extensively one-on-one, kind of like a coaching thing to really sort of deepen that work. Because I know when I've had readings or people have read me, I like come away, I'm like, oh, great. I understand. And then 2 weeks later, I'm like back to, replicating the same pattern, and I have to listen to the recording. And then I teach courses. I teach a course on intuition, really helping people to hear their own guidance. And I teach, a course that's sort of kind of based on all the channeled work in my last book, sort of helping people to really kind of connect with their soul, who they really are at their core, which is what we all want. We all want to feel like, that's that piece of us that we're aligned with it, and we're living our life in integrity with it.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on the word time as well there, and I thought, I want to pull that in because if you even utter the words, beyond space and time, you see like a glazed look on people quite often. So what is your passion around time then?
So my passion around time is that for me, it has always fascinated me, the way in which time works. So just to give you an example, we know be here now, right? That's like a mantra, right? Like, the power of now, this moment, the present moment. And yet I've always been sort of mystified by like, well, but there is a past, right? There is a future. How does that work? We're all playing with time. You and I played with time. We had to agree on a time to meet here, so we're, so there's like clock time, there's psychological time. When I'm in the present, what am I really in the present? We start off learning to not ruminate about the past or obsess about the future. But even the present moment that I'm experiencing is itself like a creation based on everything that I've previously experienced. So like what I'm experiencing right now, the fact that I know that I'm in a room and this is a computer and a desk and all that, those are all past concepts and past experiences. And so I've always been fascinated by the idea that like we sort of never really touch the present. And yet that's the only moment of time. We know that this moment's gone and that moment's gone and that moment's gone. And then my timeline and your timeline and everybody else's time, like they're completely different. Like you're like a whole other dimension for me, right? Like you and I have intersected here. We're going to intersect for like 45 minutes to an hour. And then you're living out a whole other like timeline that I won't really know anything about except for what you tell me.
What happens then beyond, because I've had expansive states of being that have no time reference.
Exactly. Right. You fall out of time and you realize that time is sort of an artificial construct. And, I know a lot of people love to talk about quantum physics now and the fact that like, the mathematical models show us that at the smallest particles of our of reality, time doesn't seem to exist. It's not there. My guides have always said, they said this in the first channel book. I think it was in the first channel book. Maybe they'll correct me. That time was an agreement. Like it's a construct that we all agree to here, right? We come in, we can't escape time. Ultimately, our lives in these bodies will have an endpoint, and it's necessary. But at the same time, no pun intended, we live out what we perceive to be time, and that itself is this very strange construct. So for me, it all comes back to time. I mean, your experience of falling out of time must have been blissful. Like it was like a blissful experience. And then you're back in time. And you've got your memories and your stories and your identity and tasks, and you're back in time. And sort of it's like, for me, the goal of this work is to sort of accept time as this agreement, this constraint that I have to accept in this reality, and learn to really understand it and play with it and bend it as much as I can. And so, if I'm in the present moment, and I'm feeling some kind of way, like I'm feeling outraged or hurt or triggered, I know that that is the past. I know that that is the past, and that's coming up for to be resolved. Um, and so for me, it's all about learning to sort of have the experience you described, falling out of time, and then coming back into time and being like, okay, I'm in time again.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely I always a feeling with me that I tend to take around is, you know, you go unconscious a lot as a human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, is then bringing those patterns to awareness and coming back. Oh, I'm being present and actually leaning into more moments that I
Yeah,
can really be with the moment and
that's right.
appreciate what is, as opposed to the past or the future,
That's right. That's
which
right.
is the default mechanism
That's right.
from all of that. Yeah.
For me, that has required me to slow down a lot, and to
Yeah.
learn to slow down. Like slower you can, the more you can slow down, realizing like how much you kind of move through the world and filter out, and sort of to perceive what you're describing as sort of these moments of being present really means slowing down, and we can do that. That's one of the ways we can play with time. Um, is you know, not move through the world as quickly, and this ignoring things. Years ago, somebody read me, and that was one of the things that this person said. She's like, "You're moving through the world so quickly. You're missing yourself."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel that's a symptom of today's society, without a doubt. Like
Oh yeah.
the pressures, the technologies, the distractions, everything is keeping us so embedded in our head, and
It's
it's not
true.
allowing us to just be.
That's
And
right. We sort of, you know, technology, social media, things like, you know, Instagram, TikTok, those things which have their place in sort of sharing information, nevertheless can really um, reinforce the idea of like the quick hit, the dopamine, you know, move, and not really slowing down. You know,
mm,
like those are places where um, it can be hard to have the kind of experience that you're describing.
mm. Another question just landed in that I want to ask you then is, because obviously you're an empathetic person, and you can, and you spend a lot of time working with other people,
Yeah.
and feeling what they feel, and working through
Mm,
that, and since you had your that kundalini rising, and
yeah.
that sensitivity, I would imagine must have been heightened a lot
Oh, yeah.
moving forward. What do you How do you work with that on a daily basis for your own personal boundaries, your own personal life? Because quite often you just see, I'll hear people just say, "Oh, I just take on too much energy, and it just tires me, and
Yeah.
that's it." Like it's like they've given their entire power away, and
That's
this
right.
is why, and this is what
Yeah.
happens, and I
That's,
can never change it. It's just me, that kind of thing, right? So,
you're absolutely right. So, you know, in the context of readings, it's one of the things that over the years I've learned to do is sort of, you know, be in somebody else's energy field and experience that. And with that, particularly when in the context of somebody who is there, you know, they're a seeker, they're looking for information, you know, they're open. It's not all just the sort of negative stuff. You know, I'm in touch with the parts of them that are really like, you know, desiring to come out. You know, I feel like I'm connecting with a soul. So it's a beautiful mixed experience. But I do have to sort of, you know, after reading, make sure that I haven't taken on anything, you know, let go, give myself some space. I have my own sort of cleansing rituals. And then, you know, but daily life, particularly as somebody who lives in New York, you know, I'm on the subway. Oof, there's all sorts of stuff. So, you know, I recite mantras in my head, you know, designed to sort of clear negative energy. I really, and this is something I teach people to do. I learn to draw my energy field in really close to my body. Because most people's energy fields are just like vague and they have no idea what they're doing. If I think about it, how people look in their head, it's like everyone's walking around with like these clouds, just diffuse around. They're all just mixing with each other. And then honestly, I sometimes have to just move away from people. I'm on the subway and like I can stand next to somebody and all of a sudden I will feel like in my gut, like, oof, this is like, there's some stuff there. I literally just have to get up and go to another car, like,
yeah.
You do have to protect yourself. I encourage people to say, when they recognize this is not mine, return to sender. I say return to sender. I'm like, this is not mine.
Yeah.
I turn it over. I'm like, you did not ask me to take this on.
Totally. Well, and leading into what you're talking about as well then, and we tend to go on this soul's journey, and there's this part of us that's not even aware of any of this.
Yeah.
At this, I mean, that was me. I mean, I'm just
me
going
too.
through life thing. Yeah. So what do you feel then the soul's journey is while we're here?
Yeah. It's such a great question. I'm going to try to do justice to it briefly, because I feel like that's the sort of question, you could just put me, on I get to sit here for 15 minutes and talk about that. Ultimately, for me, the bottom line is the soul comes in with a desire to express itself. Okay, that's ultimately what, and we find that in different ways, in sort of passions, in values, and things like that. When you feel in flow, when you feel alive, when you feel in integrity, when you feel, and people know when it feels like when they feel like they have, to use an expression that you can't really, I don't believe that you can really like sell your soul in the sense of, but when you're in a job that feels unenlivening, where you feel like, that this isn't why you're here. I feel like ultimately that's what the soul is here to do, is to express itself. But how it expresses itself, how that wants to come through, and then for you to sort of live. I mean, this is the ultimate, I think, is to live in complete integrity and alignment with your soul, as if there were, no separation. And, and what that means is that, you're listening, you're clearing, you're anything that comes up from a past life or from this life that, the part of you that you said, I didn't even realize I had a soul. I was just going through life. That learned, we're sort of unlearning so that soul can come through. And I don't think you can get it wrong. That's ultimately the other piece. I had a truly beautiful experience on the island of Kauai, where I was having some work done, and I was having some really deep heart work done. And I had that moment. This is the closest I've had to what it sounds like an NDE, but I had a moment where I literally, in what felt like an instant, saw every moment of my life, like all the stuff pre-awakening, just like rapid. It was like the camera like fast forwarded through my life, and it was utterly perfect, God, utterly perfect. Like every moment was perfection. Even moments that you'd look back and go, wow, where was I? My ego was all over the place. Look at what I was doing, what I was living. And I think that's ultimately what our soul wants, is for us to live in this moment, knowing that this is utter perfection for each of us, even though we can be in like the most horrific of circumstances. I guarantee I was not in any way, when I was having a breakdown and, thinking that my life is over and like I've turned down this fellowship and what have I done with my life, I wasn't looking at my life and going, oh, this is perfection. But in the moment, from the perspective of the soul, it was. And so everything we're doing is to be able to see through the eyes of the divine, through the soul's perspective, so that we experience this moment as perfection.
Do you ever ponder upon that you had to go through that dark night of the soul to truly appreciate and let in that divine moment to give you the contrast of what's possible?
Yeah. I certainly believe that I did, but I also like to think that there's a version of Patrick in the multiverse, that like listened a little bit differently and became a yoga instructor, and then maybe had this incredible awakening and was like, law, why would I think about the law? I love thinking about that because for me, I know the multiverse is of enormous like theoretical interest, and people think a lot about multidimensionality and the fact that like sort of at every moment in time that you've made a choice, you've branched off. But then I think ultimately, what is the underlying desire there? Was it a desire to have a different experience? As if to say my life could have been different? Is there just a hint of regret and that to me is where the path is, like whatever those other infinite Patricks out there who've taken a different path. For me, I needed to do that and to sort of embrace my life and not think, oh, if only I could have just avoided that.
No, for sure. I do ponder on those things because I'm being a little bit older and wiser than my old self. My family, like my life is very rich. I live in a beautiful place in the world near the ocean. My family and what I have in my life, I'm just very grateful for it. And the life I've created myself, and I lean into that every day and don't take it for granted because there was a large period of my life where loneliness and feeling outside and not fitting in any shape or form and lost was a large part of my early adulthood as well. And I don't know if I would truly soak in everything I have in these moments.
Yeah.
If I hadn't had that as well.
Exactly. Is the contrast that gave you that. You had that experience, and now you have that contrast to sort of remind you. And I think that when you have, I don't want to purport to be an expert on life after death, but I think that when you review your life, you're going to see the perfection in all of that. And part of that perfection will be the role that it played in giving you contrast, which is why, the experiences that we have that can feel painful, we develop the capacity now to both look back at them and see them differently. That's part of the resolution of those, so that like they're integrated in our psyche as not like, oh, this horrible part of my life, but as you said, I remember the contrast, and so that we can appreciate them.
What would you say to people listening to this if they were going through a challenge right now and all they want to do is hit the eject button? Right?
Yeah.
It's just like, get me out of here. I'm done.
All of us do this, right? For me, the message is always the same. Of like everything that you're going through is for your highest good. It really is. Like you and the universe are like co-creating. You and your soul are co-creating right now what you are going through right now. And we don't always see it clearly, right? We don't know. We don't always understand like the web that we are right now. Like we still think of ourselves as sort of in a body, separate from the rest of the universe, which we kind of are, and yet we know we're not. We know we're completely interdependent. We're all part of the fabric of space and time, and we're sort of beyond time. And so when you're going through some really challenging thing, I like to hold kind of both the very basic premise of, yeah, that's painful. Like I don't want to sort of rush past the fact that people go through a lot of pain, whether it's health issues, loss of a job, a divorce, whatever, death of a loved one. And, at the same time, it's just trusting that this is part of, your soul's evolution in some way. And that if you can keep that part of you open, even while you're grieving, angry, upset, that over time you're going to understand the value of this. So I encourage people not to short circuit their feelings by any means, but to recognize that, this is part of their life, and that it has a purpose. And that's where whatever connection you have with your soul, with your guides, the sort of the guidance that sort of you can't really get from anywhere else but yourself internally. What is this moment for? That's part of what we have to build. You've had a Kundalini awakening. I've had a Kundalini awakening. My life is not perfect. I don't know. It's not for, in the very conventional sense of that term, and I am not walking through life every single day at every moment going, I am one with the universe. I'm in space and time. And part of it is accepting that. Part of it is like moving back and forth.
Well, it's a subtle trap, isn't it? I always say, because people go, as they lean into this work more, they go chasing the experiences maybe.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, what do you think is going to happen when you have it? All your problems are still there.
Yeah. You're going to come back in a body. You got to clean the house. You got to pay taxes, and you got to navigate with your neighbors. And part of it is can you now see that stuff as just as beautiful as the blissful, blissed out experience that you've had? And I think that that's really the evolution. To me, that's the soul's journey, right? Is to give you a sense of what's possible as experience, and to then say, can I now look at this and have it be just as meaningful and just as beautiful and just as powerful is that? And I'm not saying I'm there, but can I clean the dishes and tidy the house and pay my bills and be like, this is just as good as a Kundalini awakening?
Right. I hear you. Yeah, totally. Just wrapping up the podcast, Patrick, I'm just aware of my time here. What have you got coming on the horizon? Have you got any more books coming? How many books do you have? And what's in the future for you?
Yeah. So I do not have any new books. My last book was in 2022, Endless Awakening. And I want to take a little time. I published 3 channeled books very quickly. And then I wrote Endless Awakening, which is kind of a combination of sort of some of the wisdom in those and some of my own sort of integration of that in a different voice, non-channeled, sort of lots of, stories, trying to sort of offer a little bit of a different perspective about the spiritual path. It's really about paradox and what I was just describing of can I be both, in this material body, and can I also be blissed out and be really, okay with both of those experiences, not chase one at the expense of the other. And so I'm taking some time off from writing. I have some works. I have some channeled stuff. that I should get done. I have an irreverent relationship with my guides sometimes. I'm like, they're like, let's chat. I'm like, but I've been focusing on doing readings for people, and an upcoming course on sort of what I'm calling Journey to Wholeness, sort of, really aligning with your soul, and sort of how to do that work so that, you don't feel stuck.
Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I actually got two more questions for you. The first
Sure.
one is, from somebody that's had an academic background to not knowing this work exists, to doing going, the complete end of the spectrum to what you do today, and transitioning that yourself. When you look upon the world right now and everything that's going on in the world, are you optimistic? Are you fearful? Are you Are you neutral?
So that's such a great question. I'm always optimistic in the sense that, um, ultimately, I believe it's all there's that perfection, um, that, we're accelerating people's awakening. Um, I really do feel, though, that we are going to go through a very, very difficult period with the planet. We are not listening at all to what's happening with climate change. And for me, it's very difficult because I can look at sort of, politics and the law and see,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand those systems. And I look at them and go, wow, they're still just all just grappling for little bits of power, and you see the egos in play. And so it's one of the things, by the way, where, you know, I meet a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm in my corporate job and I want out. And I'm like, please stay, because you're the people that need to be in the corporate world, right? Like, I don't want people to, everybody has their choice, but those domains feel very, very bleak to me. So I ultimately trust, but um, and I know that there's a tendency to sort of see things in a very bleak way. I know there's a lot of beauty in the
Mm.
world, but I do think, and I keep getting messages around preparing for really dire climactic, climate based situations, food and water. I'm very, very attuned to water. I get a lot of messages about water, what our water supply is. And so, to the extent that people are thinking about that, and a role in government, or, like, what can they do? Protecting access to water is one of the things that I think is increasingly really troubling.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it feels like the old paradigms are slowly breaking down and everyone's grappling onto what is, as opposed to. But there's also some incredible people out there that are
100%.
forward thinking and optimistically looking as well. It's just, can we get enough jumping from one side of the fence to the other?
Exactly. And so I encourage people to, it's difficult. It was my third book. I encourage people to learn to be with politics and be with what's happening in society without getting swept up, and because it's very, it can be very overwhelming and whatnot. In other
Hmm.
words, just the same way what we're going through is like, like global kind of dark night of the soul. And what you don't, on an individual level, like, you know deep, deeply rooted stuff you can't ignore. And so the sort of shadow of humanity that's, present globally, you can't turn away. Now, that's not to say you can't balance that with, like, a life that's, in other words, I'm not saying consume Twitter and the news media 24/7, right? But learn to sort of also face that and be aware of it, and not ignore it, so that,
Mm.
you can meet it just as you would meet your own internal shadows.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Absolutely. Last question for you, Patrick. We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
When you think about it, is there anything you want to leave the listeners to ponder on?
What a great question. You've almost left me speechless. We've covered so much ground. I think that the thing that I would leave people with, and we've touched on it, but it's not something that we've made really clear. Sort of people's fundamental power. And one of the things that I think about all the time in terms of sort of my fundamental power is that at every moment I am a creator along with everybody else's creations. And I create through choice. Every choice I make is part of me. And am I making those choices listening to my soul as best I can? Am I making those choices based on sort of old programs and patterns? And I think that if that's the one thing that you can sort of begin to sort of hold on to and think, why am I making this choice? Is this in alignment with who I really am at my core? Or is this an old pattern? And just realizing how much power you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find you, mate, if they want to reach out to you? Or...
They could find me on my website, which is, my name is a mouthful. I'm going to admit, my name is Patrick Paul Garlinger. Does not roll off the tongue. But you can also just, I have my book title is also takes me to the same one. So Endless Awakening, which is an easier thing to remember.
Okay. Yeah, there'll be links in the show notes for people if they want to.
Oh, thank you.
Jump on as well. Beautiful. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on today.
No, thank you for having me, Guy. It was such a pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, legend. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.